Hello, so I'm here with Clare Reddaway from A Word in Your Ear, which is an amazing organisation based in Bristol and Bath. And I am Eleanor Jenks, the social media manager at Arkbound Foundation. Clare, would you like to introduce yourself and say a bit about what you do?
Hello. Yes, thank you, Elena. I'm Clare Reddaway, and I run a company called A Word in Your Ear, and it specialises, or we specialise in story events in Bath and Bristol, which are either live story readings or site-specific story events, or all kinds of exciting ways to experience for readers and listeners to experience story.
Lovely. So my first question for you today is quite relevant, I suppose, from what we were just talking about. Do you have any advice for anyone who is nervous about public speaking, from the nature of your events being very public?
Yeah, well, so I work quite often with writers who've never stood up in front of an audience before, and obviously they get terribly nervous, but it's something that writers really need to do in the current way of sharing writing. They need to do it, and yes, so I think that the main thing is practice. Yeah, you'd be amazed by how many people might arrive at a sort of Story Friday stage having never actually stood up and read their work. So obviously they're all kind of all over the place, and they comment. So I think the first thing would be stand up, read your work, read it to your loved one, and let them see what you think. Then you'll find the bits where you'll trip up, where you'll get confused. You practice it so that if you get lost, as we all do, you'll be able to find it quite easily again where you are. And then I think the other thing is, once you're up on the stage, breathe and slow down. Because you'll be going really fast. Slow down, and quite often if you've got an audience in front of you, you catch their eyes, and then they're kind of going at you, and that makes you lose your place. So what I do is I focus about a foot above the person right at the back, and then you look as if you're talking to them, but actually you're talking to a little bit of air. Yeah. And I think the other thing is that people say you should squeeze your thumb and forefinger, and this makes sort of zingy things happen in your brain. I don't believe it, but it is distracting. So there's some top tips.
Those are really interesting. Thank you. I guess writing is quite kind of personal and almost a vulnerable thing to do, as it is sort of sharing that. And so to do that in a public forum is even more nerve-wracking, I imagine. But it's great that that's a way that people can share their stories, and it perhaps overcome some anxiety as well.
Absolutely. And it is also the adrenaline. The people who've never done it before come off, oh, when can I do it again? When can I do it again? Because it's so fantastic. And, there are people laughing, and then you get this huge clap, and that's really nice.
Sounds fantastic. So my second question today was, I was reading about the events that you host, and they take you all over the place, from sort of swimming pools to cobblestone streets, and it sounds very atmospheric. And I was just wondering, what do you think makes a compelling event? What elements have to come together? And feel free to give any examples, would be great to hear.
Yes, well, what makes a great live? Well, I think it's so exciting. I think when we didn't have live events, we realised how wonderful live events were. And, when now live events are starting again, I think it's that connection between the person who's performing or reading and the audience. There's a sort of alchemy that happens, and it's really exciting. So I think there's that connection, which is really important. And there's also, we do quite a lot of stuff outside, and there's something about being in the place where the story comes from that is very, very thrilling for an audience, and particularly if you've got a little audience. I lead a store. And now I've written a number of story walks, and there's one that I do around Clifton, and it's a small audience, and so you can talk to them, and you can read your story and give you some facts about where you are, and then they can say, "Oh yeah, I came here when I was little," or I know that flat up there. It's it belongs to this person, or in the 60s this was what this area was like. So it's a very interactive experience, which I really love, actually.
Yeah, I love that concept of an alchemy that happens. And I know that with our books especially, they're often written by people in Bristol, about Bristol, for other people in Bristol. And obviously we're based in Bristol, sort of half and half. And it's really, really nice to have this sense of people giving back to the community in a kind of constant process of writing stories. And then, like you say, people pick them up and add their own narratives onto them. And that's a really special process.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So going on from that, I was going to ask you how being in those settings and the history of those settings kind of impact storytelling at all?
Well, a lot of the work that I do is site specific, so it's very much inspired by the kind of stones and the landscape and the buildings and the architecture and the contemporary life and the historical life around the place, and so hugely influenced. But it's not really kind of the history of Bristol or the history of Bath. It's a person that was in this particular place at this particular moment. So it can be, there's a story that I've written in Clifton about Svetlana Stalin, Stalin's daughter, who lived in Clifton, and I've written a monologue about what that might have been like, and what people might have said to her, and what it might have felt like to be Stalin's daughter. So that is a very tiny little bit of Bristol history. It's a kind of tiny fact, but I think it's interesting. I think it's really interesting how the sort of the people and the events that have happened sort of make a kind of tapestry, really. And I might look at one thread of that tapestry and pull it out and make the whole thing unravel.
I love that. That's a great concept. It reminds me of it was Bloomsday yesterday, and that really reminds me of the sense of sort of that Ulysses just sort of wandering around. Is it Dublin, I think? And just it's the little threads, it's the shop names and the random things that you hear people talking about in the street, and these are all part of a tapestry, like you say. And those almost, in a way, more relatable than the larger histories that we try and address. It's easier to just think about, well, what was it like to live on that road or visit that shop or whatever it was.
And I think, yes, exactly. And I think that then, getting that little insight and that little insight, they build so that you get a kind of a picture of where a place has come from and how it has arrived to where it is. Although that sounds rather grand.
I know what you mean.
Don't pretend my stories do that.
So just could you tell me a bit more about your interactive events? So I read about the festive doorstep stories, which sound absolutely marvellous.
Oh yeah, that was a really lovely project, actually. It's one of my all-time favourites. So during the pandemic, obviously live events couldn't happen. We were really missing them, and I worked with the people I often put on events with, Kilter Theatre. We thought, what can we do? People can only meet in little groups of 5. I think it was 5 or 6. And we thought, well, the audiences can't come to us. Why don't we take the stories to them? So we kind of drove around, it's a dark night, had lanterns, and people would book a slot, and an actor would come and read them a story, and everybody really got into it, and they sat on their doorsteps and wrapped up in their blankets, and you know, had mulled wine, and then they had this beautiful story read, this sort of Christmassy, sort of Christmassy story. We had a kind of menu of stories that you could choose from. And I think that the sort of ultimate one, that we went to a farm just outside Bath, and we were in a stable, so that the actor read the story in the stable with the sort of 5 people sitting there, and all the horses sort of, you know, listening to and snorting along when they liked it. That was very magical, actually. And I think it was because of the nature of that time, it was lovely to be able to offer that, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that I think we've come across in our work as well, just the sheer power that storytelling has to bring people together and to acknowledge similarities and kind of just a shared humanity, I guess. And especially during COVID, we ran a project as well about sort of mental health and writing and things. But is that a project that you'd like to run again this year, or was it more sort of COVID specific?
I think it was very much of its time. It was very complicated logistically. I think it was. I don't know. I mean, I think if people would, if that desire is there, I think that people now want to sort of gather in larger numbers, and, you know, might be sick of each other, actually, sick of the 4 other people that they live with. I mean, maybe not. I don't know. I think if the circumstances were right, then we might do it again, because it really was. It was a very beautiful project, actually.
Yeah. So A Word in Your Ear both encourages and provides a platform for new and aspiring writers. What do you think is the biggest hurdle for new writers? And that could be maybe just first mistakes that people make, or reasons why people put their pens down.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, actually, because I think that there are huge blocks between, you know, somebody sort of thinking, oh, I'd really like to write that. And I think there are a couple that I was thinking about. So I think people get very nervous. They've been made nervous by school, you know. Oh, am I spelling this right? You know, where should I put the comma? Oh, what about an apostrophe? Oh, my God. And, you know, should I start a new paragraph? And that just gets in the way totally. Or, you know, I can't write that because my words, I don't know what that word means. Oh, that's too long. Oh, I'll do something else. And you know, I think that it's really important. Just write. Just stick it down. You know, all of that grammar is important, and the spelling, but not at the beginning. Just write what you feel and think in the words as they come to you. You know, you can put all that grammar and stuff afterwards. So I think that is a real barrier. And I think, and then another thing that I think is a barrier is, it's got to be perfect. You know, I've got to write the perfect story. It's going to come out, and you know, nothing is changed. And so, you know, I've got the blank page in front of me. Oh, but it's not quite right. Oh, I'll go and do something else. You know, and it's that thing that some people, I've not met them, but some people can write a perfect story first time. And, you know, it starts at the beginning and it goes through to the end, and it's lovely, and they don't ever have to do anything to it ever again. Most of the rest of us, writing is all about, I mean, there's that old mantra, writing is all about rewriting. You know, it's editing, it's, you know, oh, is that character good enough? What if I put this bit right at the beginning? Shall I shift those things around? What kind of, you know, shall I change the tense? Shall I change the point of view? All of those things come afterwards. You know, don't think it has to be perfect first time. So I think a lot of people think that it has to be.
Yeah, I hadn't made that connection between school and writing, but that's completely right. I think there's so much pressure, like you say, it links back to the public speaking aspect that we were talking about earlier on, kind of just the terror of a blank page and what it represents. for so many people, and having to kind of overcome that and just work through it is really difficult but very rewarding.
Yes, and I think that, you know, if you find the blank page on a computer too intimate, get a little notebook, you know, have a little, sort of have a pad of paper. I mean, I've got innumerable pads of paper here, all with sort of, you know, little bits of stuff written on them. So you might want to be a bit more organised than me. But, you know, you can have just jot things down. It's writing's a muscle, I think, and, you know, you have to exercise it. It's not going to come out. We don't all, you know, have perfect abs instantly. Perhaps if we exercise them, we might. And I think that's the very much the same with writing. You know, if you write a little bit, if you want to write a little bit every day. You know, just by hand or on the computer or on your phone. I mean, we carry these wonderful devices with us all the time. You use the note function of that to make a little note, and oh, that was interesting.
Yeah. I hope you don't mind me going off the book here, but I was wondering, is there like maybe a particular story, maybe your own or just somebody at one of your events that you know, maybe they're a new writer and they were quite surprised by their own success, or it just was really well received, anything like that?
Oh gosh, a well received. I mean, it's really interesting 'cause I ran Story Fridays for sort of 9 years, and it was an event which had 6 to 8 stories in it each time, and you know, it happened every couple of months. So there were a lot of events. So, for instance, Story Fridays, I've run other events as well. And it's really interesting, the ones that sort of, there's a couple that I mean, there were some wonderful stories that got fabulous laughs or people found very moving. But there was, you know, sometimes images stay. So there was a story by a writer called Tricia Wastford. I can't remember the name of the story, but it had an image of a soldier who drowned and was under the ice, and you could just see his gold teeth glinting. And it was such an extraordinary image, and that was years ago. And there was one about an Appalachian shawl that wrapped somebody. We did an event about quilts, and it was a letter, and it was written by somebody who'd washed and wrapped a son in this shawl and was writing to the mother, and I mean, honestly, even thinking about it, the hairs on my arms go up. I mean, it was beautifully read by Caroline Garland of Kilter Theatre. But it was very good. I mean, there have been innumerable stories that I've loved. But those two do leap out.
Yeah, it just sounds like such a magical event, and I'd want to go to one of your events now. It just sounds like a really amazing space. Yeah.
Oh, that's very nice. Well, I think that it's a funny thing, because people sort of, you know, I say, oh well, you know, it's people stand up on stage and read stories, and they're like, yeah, that sounds, no, not for me. And then they come, and there's something about listening to a story being read to you. And one of the things we were talking earlier about performing, the story needs to be read well. Mm-hmm. I mean, writers can destroy their stories by reading them badly, and then, you know, the minute you break that spell, the audience is thinking, oh, you know, what am I going to buy in Sainsbury's today? Oh, what's for supper? You know, but if you've got that spell, you've taken them to a world that they had no idea that they were going to. It's very exciting. One of our audience members once said, you know, the regular audience member said, what I really like is that first minute where you don't know where you're going to go, and the writer gets up on stage and you don't know what's going to happen. And I thought that was great, actually.
Yeah, there's something magical in that moment, I imagine. Um, we're we're about to publish a book for kids, and I'm looking forward to. We've been promoting it by putting pictures of dogs on social media, which has been really fun for me. And
Yeah.
also, like, just the thought of people, like children being read that story is really exciting. And like you say, just the act of reading stories just makes them come to life, and they're much more memorable as well. I think it's easy for the brain to remember, especially with things that rhyme as well. Those stories really, really stick with us.
Well, yeah, absolutely. The Gruffalo. I mean, I
Yeah,
could virtually still recite it now.
yeah.
And it's really interesting, that thing of the repeating. I wrote a children's story years ago, and I recorded it and I sent it off to some weird edge of the internet somewhere, and a couple of years ago, and it was a long time ago that I sent it. I said, "Oh, how's that going?" And 80,000 downloads of my story had
Wow.
been read to. So 80. I couldn't believe it, actually, that many people had I'd been reading to that many children.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a really good achievement.
Yeah, it was nice to think.
Yeah. The last question for now, I guess, is storytelling has a way of reflecting on our own interests and times. Considering the current state of the world, do you think that writing has the power to catalyze change? I know this is something that at Arkbound we're basically built around that concept.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think Or do you mean? I wonder whether you mean for writers or for society.
For society, I would say. But you could
Yeah.
say both if you want. Yeah.
So I think that, I mean, of course, writing can make things change. I mean, you just think about, Martin Luther King and I Have a Dream, or Ich bin ein Berliner with Kennedy in Berlin, and those sorts of amazing speech moments, or indeed some of those amazing novels like 1984. Just make you look at things in a different way. Beloved, just wow, looking at the world in a different way. I mean, I couldn't possibly compare what I do to any of those things, but I think that, again, it's those little threads in the tapestry. I think writing's all about empathy, and that when readers or listeners excuse me, if they can empathize with a character, and that's what a story is all about, is you want to know what's going to happen with that character. You care. If you care and empathize, then you begin to understand that character's world, that character's struggles. And if that's a world that's not your world, and is a world that reflects a bit of society that we're dealing with at the minute, that maybe you're not familiar with or you haven't thought about, then it might make that reader think, "Oh God, I had no idea," and I think that's great. So I read the other day Kit Duvall's My Name Is Leon, and it's the most wonderful book, and it's just about to be made adapted on the BBC. But I thought I'd read it first. And it's from the point of view of a young boy who's fostered in the 1970s, and is beautifully written and incredibly moving and shocking. Because these things, but to actually feel them is just extraordinary. I don't know whether that will change the whole of society, but if it changes a bit of the mind of one of the readers, that's a small step. As for now, what was the question? Whether writers,
Yeah.
writing has the power to catalyze change. I mean, I think for writers, definitely. I mean, and I'm speaking to the converted with you at Arkbound, of course. I think it's an extraordinary way extraordinarily powerful way to deal with to help with mental health, with just understanding yourself and understanding society. And it's a way to kind of calm yourself, and to order yourself in some ways. I'm sure that's not the way that I should put it, but I do think that for writers it can change and help you very powerfully.
Absolutely. I guess it's reading and writing is both about kind of, it melts down a lot of barriers that we have perhaps towards connecting with other people, and at the same time it helps you helps one understand oneself a bit better as well, like you say. And I'm not sure there are many other things that have those two functions in one, and in such a kind of subtle and fun way, if that makes any sense.
Yes, no, totally, and beautifully put. I think that's exactly right. I agree.
Okay, those are all of my questions for today. So thank you so much for speaking to Arkbound, and it's been so lovely to talk to you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Elena. It's been great, and you know what great work you're doing at Arkbound. Well done. Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.